we saw the Hacking for Defense program, and they were talking about a problem statement around pilot training. And we read through the problem statement of, you got a fighter squadron and they need to be combat ready, and there's all of these techniques they need to learn. And the Air Force is facing kind of macro challenges around a shortage of pilots. How do we train them faster, more effectively? And Sasha and I looked at each other and were like, man, this really sounds pretty similar to the dynamics of a professional sports organization.
This is All Quiet on the Second Front, a podcast where boring conversations around defense tech and national security come to die. Join me, Tyler Sweat, and my Second Front comrades as we dismantle the mundane and cut through the bureaucratic BS to demystify the world of defense tech. But be warned, this is not a typical government podcast. Ready to get weird?
All right. What is up, everybody? I am your host, TJ Rowe. Welcome to another episode of All Quiet on the Second Front, where boring defense talk comes to die. Very excited for today's episode as we continue our series of customer spotlights here at Second Front. And very excited to welcome Andrew Powell, CEO and founder at Learn to Win, to join the pod with me today. Welcome, brother.
Thanks, TJ. Great to be here.
Dude, so before we dive in, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. What's the founder story? You guys have been rocking for close to 5 years now, or maybe over 5 years, but how did you end up in this market? What drove you here?
Yeah, well, thanks again for the invite. So I have always been interested in learning. That's been my whole career. Started early days at Coursera, was on the course operations and pedagogy team, and then spent a few years working to build a new startup university system in sub-Saharan Africa, where we were really just rethinking kind of everything around higher ed. And through that experience, got really interested in the intersection of learning technology and data science, and then how you could basically transform how people learn to be faster and more effective. And so my co-founder, Sasha, and I went to Stanford Business School basically with the goal of building what became Learn to Win. So it's been kind of a long time passion and interest of just how technology can drive learning and how to apply that to problems that matter. And I'm sure we'll get into the story of, specifically how we landed in defense and, why we're called Learn to Win, which comes actually from our sports industry work. But that's a little on my background.
Beautiful. And kind of on the journey, did you guys start out with a defense use case in mind, or start out with dual use in mind? Or when you kind of had the pain point, you had the demand signal, you said, hey, this capability needs to exist across a variety of use cases and verticals. Was that primarily for sports organizations and franchises, high-performing teams? How did you guys kind of get started there?
Yeah, so we were in graduate school at Stanford, using that time in business school as our incubation period to think about the idea. And right along the same time as we took Hacking for Defense, which is specifically how we got going in the defense market, we were prototyping a concept with professional sports teams, actually. So Sasha's background, he played basketball at North Carolina. The two of us were friends in undergrad, and I was really interested in education, and he was on the team there, and he had this experience of getting his playbook, which was literally a stack of photocopies of hand-drawn plays. And meanwhile, I, was interested in education tech, and I thought, man, there's so much better ways to learn this than just staring at, X's and O's on a piece of paper. And yet that's the way that a lot of elite sports programs, which, by the way, highly competitive. They want to win. They want to get an edge over the competition. And so the first idea of the product was basically Duolingo, but for learning sports plays. And how could we build a software platform that enables a coach, say the coach of the LA Rams, who, Sean McVay is a customer of ours now. You want to build a playbook about every single play. It might be 400 different concepts. And instead of it just being a static PDF that you look at, could you have a video of a play, and then it pauses and it says, all right, if the safety moves from this place on the field over to here, how does that change our check at the line of scrimmage? And you quiz the players to make sure that they actually are getting it right or wrong. They get feedback. And the idea was this would be a much more effective learning experience. But perhaps even more importantly, you give data to coaches of exactly what their people know and what they're missing. So we were at Stanford and we built the first version of the product and got our first 4 or 5 customers, including Michigan football and UNC football and the LA Rams and the Carolina Panthers. And then we saw the Hacking for Defense program, and they were talking about a problem statement around pilot training. And we read through the problem statement of, you got a fighter squadron and they need to be combat ready, and there's all of these techniques they need to learn. And the Air Force is facing kind of macro challenges around a shortage of pilots. How do we train them faster, more effectively? And Sasha and I looked at each other and were like, man, this really sounds pretty similar to the dynamics of a professional sports organization. Maybe there's something here. And so we just kind of took the course as a way to explore that market. And fast forward to today, DoD is the majority of our revenue. But honestly, the initial inspiration was all in that sports space, with the general thought that, if you solve a high intensity learning problem, there's adjacent markets that you can go after beyond just that first beachhead.
Yeah, I think when we first met, probably close to 3 years ago, I thought about my own experience, both as a collegiate athlete for a Division I sport and as a Ranger officer in the Army. There's clear analogies between high performing teams in the military and in sports at a high level. But I'd love, this morning I went back and watched your Hacking for Defense presentation in 2019. It's you and Sasha and Phil and the crew at Stanford. Talk a little bit about kind of product market fit, and as you're driving this product that is clearly kind of horizontal in nature across different use cases and different verticals. But as you went from 0 to 1, you went very quickly across different verticals and use cases. What was that journey like as a founder, and as you started to piece together, okay, this is 0 to 1 from a product vision, but we're quickly getting to product market fit and we're scaling? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, I think that we were always balancing ideas around problem solution fit and then also product market fit. And so problem solution, I think that the core problems we're working on are like human learning problems. What's the fastest, best way to learn information? How do you personalize it to individual learning gaps? How do you tie that to outcomes that matter, whether it's passing a test or performing on a football field or, hitting a sales quota? Like, learning in some way matters to every single organization. And our belief was that most organizations were not doing it in a terribly effective way. They weren't leveraging the modern approaches in tech. They weren't leveraging data. They weren't very outcome oriented. It wasn't agile or kind of effective enough. And so that problem solution fit we thought was like generally applicable. And then as far as product market fit, there's the questions of who's willing to pay for it? Is it an acute enough problem set? Can you serve them with a good margin at scale or repeatedly? Is it a large enough market to justify all the engineering investment and the venture backing? And so we saw an interesting problem solution fit that was pretty universal in pro sports, particularly in these high intensity areas where results really matter. And then as far as product market fit, we realized pretty quickly, if you do the venture math on the pro sports industry, 32 NFL teams, maybe they'll pay optimistically a few $100,000 a piece. I mean, you're looking at 5 to 10 million in revenue total. College teams, you can maybe build a market there, but we knew that we would have to branch beyond sports. But from just a problem solution area, that was such an interesting laboratory of innovation where we got so many great ideas for the product. And then in DoD, I think we found, you got a few million people across the DoD. It's a massive educational enterprise. Essentially, when we're not fighting, we're training to fight. And so much training that's going on. And then we learned, as you all know well, that a lot of the software systems that are currently serving our warfighters are not up to the standards of what, they should be in the 21st century, particularly as we look at a much more sophisticated adversary. And so in that, we thought from a product market fit area, if we can build a much better solution, there's tremendous impacts to be had in bringing a modern, effective cloud-hosted software that really works to drive these training missions.
Yeah, and you started with pilot training, right? And kind of how did that iteration loop get to more education use cases? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of, high intensity end users across the department, but there's also low intensity and medium intensity, I think, where this applies directly as well. So how did you guys kind of iterate through, after product market fit, solution fit, into the 1 to 10 problem of scaling across kind of different end users through the department, or even broadly outside of, commercial use cases as well?
Yeah, great question. So we targeted some of these really high intensity use cases first because we thought if we can solve it for that might be the hardest area to really demonstrate major improvement, we can then translate that to a ton of other spaces that might not be quite as high stakes. And so, one example is the LA Rams. The year they won the Super Bowl, they were using Learn to Win consistently. And they were finding a ton of value in the insights that they would get about what players were getting right or wrong. And I won't name any names, but you'd be amazed. Like some of the players, not specific just to them, but across college and pro sports teams, they might get a pregame quiz of what to do in a certain situation and literally miss half the questions. Like there's a lot of mental errors that were being caught and prevented by using Learn to Win. And we thought, man, if there's like even at a elite sports level, you're still adding a lot of value by bringing this data. Just imagine what it would be like for a typical schoolhouse, or for thousands of people who all need to know a career field and are likely not getting the same resources or coaching or focus that you'd have in one of these more high intensity settings. And so similar with DoD, starting with some of the formal training units for fighter squadrons, and demonstrating a lot of value in terms of improving knowledge adoption, knowledge retention, mitigating some key errors. We were then able to sort of translate those results to more of the kind of foundational schoolhouse curricula. For example, with 2nd Air Force, working in some of their schoolhouses across career fields and having the goal of just preparing people to do their jobs most effectively, either faster or reducing eliminations or washbacks in a schoolhouse. The analog of, if it works for some of those super high intensity things, it can also translate to some of those lower intensity. So I think at this point, we think there's really enterprise-wide applicability to what we're providing, because every job requires learning to some extent, and there's always things that you can do faster or more effectively to achieve that goal, whatever it is that your objective for your role or your mission is.
Yeah, and I love that example, because I think right now in our market, in defense tech or dual use tech, there's a very healthy debate around what is dual use technology, and is there a place for dual use technology in this market? And when you get kind of, I would say, lower in the tech stack and you get into hardware, you get into the integration layer, there's some arguments that are pretty sufficient that dual use doesn't really map here. But when you look at vertical SaaS in these use cases, I mean, it is the best definitional example of what dual use is and how to do it successfully. And that's why I love these examples where you see value driven from really the same value proposition and product across these different use cases. On that kind of note, I'd love to ask if you could give advice to yourself 4 or 5 years ago when you're on the stage at Stanford in the Hacking for Defense class and you're launching your own business, or you're giving advice to founders today that are coming out of academia or they're coming out of the operational community. What would you tell them as a founder who's now gone through a successful run as a dual use technology company?
Yeah. So I think one of the big things I would tell myself, and I have to consistently remind myself of this too, is to try to reach out to people who have done it before and take their advice. I mean, there's so much that I look back on in that presentation and say, gosh, I didn't understand all of these different things that we've learned over the course of the next 4 or 5 years. And I'm sure if I look forward 5 years from now, I would look back at myself today and there's a whole nother list of things that I, just don't know. And I think we got such a leg up by being able to learn from, Steve Blank and Joe Felter and Raj Shah and all of these, real titans of defense innovation, and continue to pull on their advice in building our company. Now we're blessed that a lot of those are investors now in the company, and so we can continue to leverage their insights. But, I look back and I knew so little at the time that I could have, really, really accelerated, I think, our growth and our learning curve if I would have chatted with folks who, say, hey, how did you build a 50 million revenue business in software in the government? What does that look like? What were the big steps that you took? And we'd have just benefited so much from finding those advisors and leveraging their insights. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice in the early days. Find someone who's done what you hope to do over the next few years and just ask them tactically how they did it.
Yeah, I love that. And I echo the sentiment. I think we joked about, looking back at our seed decks from a couple of years ago, and man, we did not know a lot about how this actually works. But we've been fortunate to have great partners, great advisors on this journey. And I think it's also important to kind of take a snapshot temporally of the market as it's evolved, where in 2019, there weren't products like Game Warden from Second Front that allowed for the rapid adoption of commercial technology. There were still really early innings on what was DIU, what was places like Inkytel, what are the front doors for technology coming into the department, and then how do those scale past the front door? And while we still have a lot of work to do, I think as an ecosystem and frankly as a federal government adopting technology, it's trending positively. It's trending the right direction. So we've talked a lot about 0 to 1 problems, product market fit, kind of growing and scaling across each of these verticals. What is the future of Learn to Win look like as you iterate on greater adoption in the Department of Defense, greater adoption in commercial enterprise? What's the future of the team? What's the future of the product look like?
I think we're at a really exciting moment because we've gotten to a level of scale across Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, as well as commercial customers, where we have tens of thousands of users who are in the product and are studying in a schoolhouse or studying in a formal training unit or preparing for a job across a ton of different career fields. And our product is such that it generates immense amounts of data. Obviously, if a customer is going from a paper-based process where they're giving out 3-ring binders and then spending 9 months in a schoolhouse and then taking a paper exam at the end, the first step is just to digitize all that stuff through Learn to Win. And that's led to tremendous benefit. In a lot of cases, if we're entering a schoolhouse, we can cut their failure rate in half because it's a much better learning experience. The instructors get much better visibility about how students are performing before they actually wash back or get eliminated from a course. But to me, just digitizing is like step one of the process. Like there's so much more cool stuff you can do once the process is actually digital. For example, we're starting to analyze all of the data around months and months of student behavior and say, what are the leading indicators that someone might eventually fail? And what are the ideal interventions from a learning perspective to prevent that person from failing that test? Or it doesn't have to be about tests. It could be, what are the leading indicators that someone doesn't understand a key process for a maintenance squadron that's going to lead to actual aircraft downtime if they make that certain mistake? And so that's where we're starting to invest a lot behind kind of predictive algorithms for how you gain insights from that learning data to then actually, not just make it faster or more effective, but actually fundamentally change how training can drive mission outcomes that matter. And so that I'm super excited about some of the innovation that our partners in the Air Force and Navy in particular are driving, and what we can start to do when, it's not just the step from paper to digital, but it's how do you go from a digital process to an optimal process? And much more to be shared on that in the coming years. But that's what I'm excited to finally be able to work on.
Yeah, I love to hear it. I think every technology business, if it's done right, becomes a data business at some point. We're even seeing quite a bit of this just on the accreditation and managed hosting side, where a lot of these workflows for the past 2 decades have been managed on PDFs and spreadsheets, and it doesn't actually give the department or an authorizing official really a true snapshot of their security and compliance posture, or what is the risk associated with what they're hosting on the network. So we're seeing the same thing on our side. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time today. Excited to keep growing together, brother.
Thanks, CJ. And shout out to Second Front and the Game Warden platform. I think to your question of how do you balance things as a dual use company, it really has been such an advantage for us to be able to kind of build commercially focused on those problem sets, and then be able to really accelerate all of the security accreditation and the translation of that to a DoD environment, because that's certainly a big difference between a commercial market and the DoD market. But if we can really focus on solving that core problem, and then you guys help us to make all those other very hard things a whole lot simpler, I think that's key for a dual use company, is because otherwise you're basically building 2 completely separate products, and at a point you almost have 2 completely separate companies, but the software that can enable this dual use mechanism, I think is a really key piece of it.
100%. We could talk for hours about, I think, the go-to-market motion in this ecosystem, but the most important component is partners and channels. We're not going to build this on our own. We're not going to be successful on our own. You go fast alone, but you go far together. And we're excited to have you guys on board.
Amen. Well, thanks, CJ. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks, brother.